So I wanted to thank Ken and the Brandeis Center for inviting me to moderate this panel. I'm very honored to be on stage with four very inspiring academics who have responded to rising Jew hatred by pivoting from their prior academic pursuits and devoting the bulk of their academic and professional time to defending the Jewish people on campus and off campus. I'm going to let each of them talk a little bit about themselves and their trajectories when they come up to speak. That'll be more interesting than hearing me go through their bios. And we'll start with Thane Rosenbaum.
Thanks, Jason. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. I know it's the last panel, and I know you're tired, and I will definitely not go over. Anat, thank you for mentioning the Touro message, because I am a professor at Touro, and we actually have just started an Anti-Semitism Institute, and what Anat was saying is just one piece of it, including a social media piece, including a legal clinic, which Mark Goldfeather is part of, so thank you. I want to thank Ken, not only for his endless inspiration, but also he was my lawyer. I was one of, I guess, 15 plaintiffs in the lawsuit against University of California, Berkeley. One of the times that I went to speak there, I had what I would call a typical Thane Rosenbaum experience at a university, a miserable time, speaking to students. And so Ken said, you know what, you should be one of our plaintiffs. And I said, all right, but this is what it's like to be me. Let me just give you a public health warning. I think it's appropriate. If you have your radiation goggles with you, now is the time. I'm going to show you something that you really can't look at directly. You can have to indirectly. This is a book that, not directly, you can't look at this directly. It's my last book, came out a year ago. You won't know about it. It's titled Beyond Proportionality, Israel's Just War in Gaza. The book was not being offered in any bookstore. You can only get it online. Bookstores told my publisher that the staff would quit en masse if the book was shown in the bookstore itself. And nearly 24 universities canceled book talks. I was invited to speak at book talks. And in fact, my own university, Touro, didn't cancel it, of course, but they didn't promote it on social media. That's how bad things are. What does this book do? Why is it that you need radiation goggles? Why did I issue a public health warning? Well, it looks at the war in Gaza through just war theory. Yes, there are wars, there are just wars, there are rules of warfare, the laws of armed conflict, the rules of engagement, United Nations Charter, international humanitarian law, the Geneva Conventions, the protocols to the Geneva Conventions, the law manuals. You don't even probably, even though you're all lawyers, you probably don't even know that there are that many pieces of text around the law of war. You wouldn't know it because you weren't allowed to know it. There was one word that answered everything: genocide, right? Not even war crimes. When it came to October 8th, we weren't even at war crimes. We skipped over everything. And the idea that there are actually just wars, and remember, this is not new. Michael Walzer wrote a book, Justin, on just wars. There's elements, and it's what's so fascinating. It wasn't very long ago, a panel ago, we spent an hour treating the IRA like a Talmud class. You know, we treated it here like the definition. We broke the word down. What does this word mean? Not when it came to the war, though. The war, you would think that law professors would be saying, we need Thane Rosenbaum's book. We want to look at the text. We got to know. We love elements of laws. We want to look at the text, look at the text. Now when it came to this war, you're not allowed to look at the text because you answered it all with one word. So for instance, things that should have been obvious, right? Like for instance, genocide. There's the United Nations, shortly after their creation, entered into a contract with all the other countries in the world. and they passed the UN Convention on Punishment and Prevention of Genocide. And it's not a declaration, it's a convention. That means it's a contract. And they all agreed what would be the definition of genocide, right? And you should all know that, not just because some of you are lawyers or law professors, because the media should have told you. You should have said, there's a law. It tells you what it is. And let me just tell you, the minute Israel issued evacuation warnings and humanitarian corridors, which were immediate evacuation warnings and humanitarian corridors, it was over. You can't use the word genocide anymore. It's over because the definition of genocide. Now, I'm just one law professor. Every law professor should have said, well, this can't be a genocide, because the definition of genocide is the specific intent to eliminate a people in whole or in part. And whenever you're fighting a war, the purpose is, what's your intent? And even in the case of the Bosnian genocide, it's not actually a genocide. The international bodies had said only one of the battles in Srebrenica. Other than that, the rest of it was considered war. If you got a problem with the way the war was conducted, we can discuss war crimes. But no one uses the word genocide. But the strategy here was, if you scream genocide loud enough, really loud, and there's spit coming out of your face, that'll end the conversation. Just make sure the spit's coming out, and wear a mask, and just look like a lunatic and scream the word genocide. And law professors should have been appalled. They should, what are you, nuts? This is not what we do. We're law professors, and Thane Rosenbaum and others know what these rules are, and let's evaluate the rules, like, for instance, things that you don't know. What makes, now remember, there's the just war, of the justness of entering the war, and the justness of the fighting of the war. Two elements. Are you justly in it, and are you justly fighting it, right? These are things you should be saying, we didn't know this, of course not. And there are elements to that. Is there military necessity for each thing that you did, right? Are you basing that decision? The question is always, what are you aiming at? What are you aiming at? That's what the law looks to. Is there a military necessity for what you aimed at? Were you basing it on verifiable intelligence? Was the weapon that you used precise? Right? No one wants to talk about this stuff. This is all, and the Israelis don't fire a bullet without lawyers standing right next to them. Hamas in Iran fires rockets indiscriminately against civilian population centers. The Israelis aim for what they're looking at. The problem is, you're aiming for terrorists who are standing next to their children. And even if they're not children, Hamas will save their children, right? And so everyone just took the Hamas health ministry's casualty figures. Casualties, right? There's terms of art, casualties of war, and collateral damage. We don't use those words anymore. Now, when it comes to Israel, we don't use it. What does collateral damage mean? The damage caused in the war is collateral to what the end of what you were seeking to achieve. You're fighting a war, and this death, what's collateral, this person who's not a terrorist, is collateral to the main aim. That's why it's called collateral damage. It's not what it's about. It's about a war, but in the context of a war, there are casualties. These terms of art just somehow disappeared. And so we lost the whole meaning of the various elements, and we went straight to genocide without any discussion about what the definition of genocide is. And real genocide scholars didn't even sign up for this. Why? Because they didn't want to trivialize the crime, right? It's like calling everyone a racist. If everyone is a racist, then nobody's a racist. And similarly, if all wars are genocide, good luck to you. And believe me, countries are aware of this. They know, holy shit, we are in trouble now. Because now we've created a precedent that if you kill people, now let me tell you, Winston Churchill committed genocide. Dresden would be genocide. Hiroshima and Nagasaki is genocide. Civilians were killed. In the book I point out, Churchill literally said to American generals, we really want to pick towns in Germany that have a lot of civilians in them. We're aiming at, they were aiming, Israel doesn't. Churchill was aiming at civilians. Why? Civilians have to put the pressure on the Nazis to end the war. The civilians are complicit, and they have to they were aiming. They did not, for Dresden and some of these, can I just get my water for a second? Sorry.
You can, but we
Yeah.
should be wrapping up.
Yeah, sorry. So,
No water unless you wrap up.
yeah, no, I'm sorry. I promised to go. Abraham Lincoln, Sherman's march is genocide under these new rules, right? The whole point of the Sherman's march was to starve the South out of the war. And so we have to keep in mind what dangerous precedent was ultimately created. And so this is not a special pleading. This is a book not written for academics. It was written for a general population, which is one of the reasons why they were literally afraid of the book and afraid of its claims. You know, I'm even discussing movies. I start with the Dreyfus Affair because I think that that's a very similar thing because it emanated also out of university culture and also involved artists. All right, I will let you go. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Thane. Rona, you are up.
Hi, I'm Rona Kaufman, thrilled to be here. Thank you, Ken, for inviting me, and to Brandeis Center, and for all of you who are still here at the end of the day, because it's a long day and it's hard, and we're hearing so much depressing information, quite simply. I'm a law professor at Duquesne University Klein School of Law, and separately, I am also, along with my partner Andrea Martin over there, I am the co-founder of the Center for Jewish Legal Studies. I want to talk to you about our center today. So basically, as many of you know, since the 1960s, various fields of study have emerged within legal academia. Along with civil rights, different groups recognized that in order for their civil rights to be protected, they needed to theorize their experience and what it would mean to protect them at law, what discrimination against them looks like. So we have feminist legal theory, we have critical race studies, we have queer theory, we have indigenous peoples law, we have Asian American Pacific Islanders intersections with law, we have gender in the law, we have Lat-Crit legal studies, we have elder law, we even have animal law. What's missing?
Jewish legal studies.
Well done, Andrea.
Give her
right?
an A.
We are missing. The funny thing is we're not actually missing because we were very much behind the scenes and at the forefront of the development of probably, I'm not sure, but certainly most of those areas of legal study. So Jews have been involved in the fight for civil rights, but apparently we didn't take the time to really theorize and conceptualize ourselves as we now realize we should have. Worse, it's not just that we failed to conceptualize ourselves. An entire body of oppositional scholarship established itself and did conceptualize us. They told our story. Our story has been told by settler colonialist theorists and by Palestinian studies and by those who are redefining genocide, for example, to fit exactly anything Israel could possibly do. So not only did we not create a body of scholarship that litigators, when they would need to litigate discrimination against Jews' claims, or international lawyers when they're dealing with claims as they have been so perfectly, I'm missing the word, perfectly tailored to fit to Israel. They don't have the scholarship that they need. Certainly there were those who were creating the scholarship, and it was Eliza Lewin, and it was Ken Marcus, and it was Mark Goldfeder and Mark Greendorfer. And basically it was the people who were fighting the fight, recognizing that the scholarship, I imagine that's why, recognizing that the scholarship didn't exist to support them, they're the ones who were building the field of study. But obviously, they can't also be the litigators, unless you're a not Beck, you can't also be the litigator and also be the professor and also be the everything all the time. It is our responsibility in legal academia to be building this field of study. And so that is what we are going to do. So the Center for Jewish Legal Studies seeks to establish and advance the emerging field of Jewish legal studies. And the way that we are going to do that is through strategic scholarship, collaborative networks, education, and Israel engagement. Those are our 4 pillars. The strategic scholarship piece will start with the development of, it's already begun. So this work has begun. We've been doing it officially for about 6 months, but many of us have been doing it unofficially, just in our individual capacities and with through the Law and Anti-Semitism Conference, which was founded years ago by Katz, who wrote his case book, Law and Anti-Semitism. You know, we've been doing this, but now we are going to really come together in a strategic way where we are drafting a research agenda and refining that research agenda so that we understand what are the important intersections of Jewish peoplehood and law in various areas. For example, national security, First Amendment, Title VI, Title VII, feminist legal theory, other intersections of other areas. Somebody pointed out to me, it wasn't really on my mind, environmental law. Apparently, there are intersections between Jewish peoplehood, especially the way the state of Israel is when it comes to environmental issues and environmental law. So we are going to find, we have all these verticals of a research agenda. We are going to fund scholars to take the lead. Taking the lead means they are going to be responsible for working with the other scholars who are heading these other areas so that we're actually building something cohesive. By the way, we're not inventing this. We are just learning from our predecessors and from our enemies who have done this really quite well, quite impressively, right? When we think of, you know, the Civil Rights Movement and the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and when I think about it as, from my former career as a feminist legal theorist, you know, sexual harassment wasn't unlawful in 1964. It wasn't until the 1980s that the Supreme Court, thanks to the work of Catherine McKinnon and other feminist legal theorists, said, oh, maybe it's also discriminatory, not when you're just not paying someone as much, but when she comes to work and you're asking about her sex life every day. Maybe that's a form of discrimination. So too with us. We need to do that same thing. We need to do that same work. And it's not something that has ended for the other groups either, right? We have race and law theorists who continue to work on that. The Crown Act, that's something that's going state by state level, right? To recognize that in many cases, anti-Black discrimination can show up, it can manifest as based on hair texture and hair style. And so it's not only us, it's just that we haven't done the work yet. And now we really need to do the work. The work would happen organically. And it's already happening again. But if we just sit back and allow it to happen naturally, it'll take 30 years, and quite simply, we don't have 30 years to wait. So we are gonna take what would take 30 years, and we're gonna get it done, hopefully in 5 years, maybe 4 years, you know? We're gonna like quicken the pace of this. So the way that that strategic scholarship and the collaborative networks work together, of course the collaborative networks is about bringing together the various scholars who are going to be doing this work, ensuring that they are consulting practitioners who are doing the work, so many of you in the room, as well as Jewish organizational leaders, so the others of you, as well as policy people. So everybody in here like has a role. The education piece comes in with courses in law schools so that we can make sure that the next generation of law student actually recognize and understand what discrimination against Jews looks like. When I was at Temple, it was Marina Angel, a professor, who made sure that employment discrimination law was being taught, and the way that she got it taught was to get it on the bar exam, because otherwise no one would know what was employment discrimination, and lawyers wouldn't be able to practice in that area. So we're gonna bring in courses. We are gonna help work with others also in this room who are developing trainings. Many of the trainings, as most of you probably know out there, a lot of trainings are not grounded in law. We want trainings that are grounded in law. And then Israel engagement. Israel engagement is my favorite part of this, and if anybody has an idea for funding that I can get for all the Israel things I want to do, please let me know. Because the Israel engagement, it's easier to let go of that. With the support of the Academic Engagement Network, I led a trip of 23 faculty to Israel in November. It was incredible. Anyone who went on this trip, they had the opportunity, it was a legally focused trip, they had the opportunity to meet with legal experts from all sectors of society, such that when they got home, they knew Colonizer, apartheid, genocide, those are anti-Jewish, anti-Semitic, anti-Zionist libels against our people, and they could bring that home to their campus, to their classroom, and to their scholarship. And so I think the Israel engagement piece is really, really critical. Even someone like me, my family's Israeli, my grandparents are Holocaust survivors, I've spent much of my life going back and forth between Israel and the US. And even someone like, I feel like I am vulnerable to the onslaught of media and social media that is constantly telling me that we are doing evil. And so we need to make sure that we're bringing our faculty to Israel. Thank you so much.
Good on. Rona, you kept to your time, so you get 2 waters.
Okay. I left
Rob.
my water up there.
Hi there, my name is Rob Katz. Okay, I teach at Indiana University. And first I wanted to thank Jesse, my co-panelists, and Rona, by the way. She led the steering committee for the 5th conference, and she knocked it out of the park. Thank you, Rona. I want to thank Ken, who is the most law-generative person I know. The outstanding attorneys at the Brandeis Center, which I like to call the U.S. Department of Justice for Jewish People. So I'm just floating that one here. Okay. So, all right. So I wrote this book, which is like the first book on law and anti-Semitism.
Let me just interrupt for a second. I told Rob to bring the book.
Oh.
He was very shy. I said, no, you've got to bring the book. You've got to hold up the book. It's a 700-page book on Jewish law. So, and you're not going to, if he just said it's, a case book or whatever, you wouldn't get the full picture. So hold it up and show it to them.
Okay, just to be precise, it's 750 pages.
700.
Okay. All right, so I came to write this book through a mix of intellectual curiosity, personal trauma, and a very practical teaching program. So my curiosity was piqued years ago in my Wills, Trusts, and Estates class, where I was struck by these Jewish clauses in wills, where parents condition gifts to their children on them marrying a Jewish person. And what I found, looking at a bunch of these cases, is that the answer turns on how the courts conceptualize Jewish identity. If they view this restriction as one on religion, they see it as benign and consistent with free exercise norms. And they uphold these clauses. However, if they think of Jews as a race, and they look at these clauses then as racist and inconsistent with equal protection norms. And so I found something interesting going on, and I felt as though I had stumbled on a very rich set of questions. This was the intellectual hook. The emotional shock came, starting in 2021, through a series of anti-Semitic incidents I experienced at my institution, and I was flabbergasted. First of all, I was like, I didn't even know what this is. What is this? Is this anti-Semitism? I didn't know, but it turned out it was. And I said, how is this possible? I'm at a university, right? I mean, went to the finest schools. And I said, well, if someone in my position is vulnerable to anti-Semitism with my social resources, imagine how much worse it would be for Jews who aren't in my position. And so this turned just my intellectual curiosity in this field to a soul-searching moment, which is basically, what could one law professor do that could possibly move the needle? And I sensed that there might be an opportunity. So my first reaction, I'm a law professor, right? So it's like, okay, well, I guess I'll just teach a course on anti-Semitism in the law. That's how I'll learn it. But then when I started looking around, I found that there was no such book. I did, however, find multiple case books on discrimination based on race, gender, sexual orientation, disability. Rona went through the list. Animal law, of course. And I was shocked again. Why doesn't this book already exist, right? Given that there's no shortage of anti-Semitism or Jewish law professors. So I decided to write this case book. I was extremely fortunate by the support I received, starting with the Academic Engagement Network, Miriam, who immediately understood the importance of this project, and the Anti-Defamation League, who, thought this was, they supported me so much I was able to get course relief and higher research assistance. Just astounding, the support I received from ADL. It's really something people should know about. So I also found a very sympathetic publisher who they figured, it's like when people get this, they get it. I mean, as soon as I spoke to the publisher, they flew someone else to meet with me and approved my book proposal in 2 weeks. When you find people who get it, like everything moves like that. A casebook is necessary, because without a casebook, law professors, most of whom are really busy, they have to cull together the material on their own. There's some extraordinary law professors who can do this. Everyone on the faculty at Harvard Law School, as well as the University of Chicago, where I attended. But for most of us, this is just a bridge too far. It was really important to make this course teachable, to provide an out-of-the-box resource. Just add your own syllabus. There's a couple of things. The casebook works as a course. I taught it in the fall, and student reviews said, at least 2 said, this is the most important course I've taken in law school. Students told me repeatedly that they valued this space. I had 8 students, 6 were Catholic, 1 was Hindu, 1 was Jewish. And this is important, actually, because I actually wrote the book with, for Jewish students, but also for non-Jewish students. And I had Catholics specifically in mind, and I had a vision of a thoughtful Catholic student who wanted to wrestle with Catholicism's troubled history. And guess what? I got 6 of them showed up. And it's interesting how getting this course approved, you have the JLSAs, and I've spoken to about 7 or 8 JLSAs, they want to hear about it. They're like the vanguard getting the course into the law schools, but once it's there, it will attract. I mean, they will come. I also wrote it, of course, for Jewish law students, part because this is their heritage. This book is the story of the Jewish civil rights movement, which has been going on for millennia and has crossed, countries. And this is their patrimony. They must know this. They didn't study this in Hebrew school. So this is Jewish education as well, I envisioned in this book. I also include throughout the book discussions of anti-discrimination law as it applies to Latinos, African Americans, LGBTQ, Arabs, Asians. And I think of the book on one level as a form of community outreach. By putting these connections on the table, I'm sort of inviting allyship. I'm just putting it out there. And I think my non-Jewish students who took the course will be as fierce allies as can be found. As well as more knowledgeable about anti-Semitism than 95% of Jews. So what does the book do? Okay, what the book does, it attempts to systematize a scattered body of knowledge into a coherent field with foundational questions and concerns. I draw together disparate materials over ages. I cover over a dozen countries. I have materials from over a dozen countries: Spain, France, Germany, Israel, so forth. Although the book looks like a traditional case book, it's actually, I think of it more as a series of case studies in Jewish advocacy. Because with each case, it's a story. Shows in concrete detail how Jews and their allies in that case handled the challenges that they had. And my goal, so I think of this as like a playbook for Jewish advocates and their allies. Like, we've seen, these movies have occurred before, but if you haven't seen the movies, you wouldn't know. And so, that's what I'm doing here. So it's an advocate can think of it as like they're watching game film before their next bout. Beyond organizing the field for scholars and students, it's intended to change the legal culture in which Jewish advocates and allies operate. First, I want the book to function as a reference work for everyone interested in anti-Semitism in the law, attorneys, community advocates, PBS watchers. It's my take on the canonical materials that people who aspire to be literate in this field should know. It's a first draft. So you can think of the book as a treatise on anti-Semitism in the law that happens to present as a casebook. Second, I wanted to develop a body of materials that Jewish lawyers and their allies will hold in common, a shared legal culture. This will enable them to speak in legal shorthand to one another. Like, oh, remember how Deborah Lipstadt's attorneys beat the Holocaust denier, David Irving, by shifting the issue and from whether the Holocaust happened to whether his Holocaust historiography was sound. That was a nice move, And you get enough of these experiences under your belt, you can summon them for the case that you have to think about it. Shared legal culture. If Jewish advocates have ready access to the same materials and make them part of their intellectual architecture, they can reason faster in real time. If the book succeeds, it will herald the creation of a new discipline and field of study and attract new scholars to its ranks. It will normalize courses on anti-Semitism in law schools, teach Jewish law students the history of the Jewish civil rights movement, entice them to join it, inculcate non-Jewish students against anti-Semitism and enlist their allyship, and help practitioners, community leaders, policymakers do the Lord's work and foster a global community of Jewish activists and interlocutors. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. Last but not least, my friend Stephen Solomon.
Good friend.
Good friend.
Well done, buddy.
Thanks. I feel like the rabbi before Kiddush right now. So I promised, who always says I'm going to be short and never is, okay? So I'm going to be 5 minutes. And I want to say two things before I talk about this, which is one, I don't think anyone mentioned this, but the biggest issue in universities right now is the whole free speech and saying the IHRA and anti-Zionism violates free speech. And the Department of Education has had a 30-page Dear Colleague letter that they've been holding up for 1.5 years now. So someone really needs to get on them to push it out so we get some guidance on it, because everyone's going to say that. The second thing is I feel like I'm in Dan Signeur's oh my God story moment, which is like, we all have our terrible stories and we all say they're terrible. But I want to say I appreciate everything that everyone's doing. So I want to talk about two things. One is anti-Semitism in the law, and two is anti-Semitism legal clinics. The first thing I'm going to say to preface this is students are ignorant, and most professors are ignorant. The next time you speak to a reporter or a student, ask them to define Zionism, or ask them to define anti-Semitism, or ask them if they've ever read Edward Said's Zionism and its Discontents. Even Edward Said acknowledged what Zionism was and the Jewish rights of the homeland. He just said, don't do it at our expense. But none of that really matters, because you go to Wikipedia and look at the definition of Zionism, which our students are copying, by the way, now to redo their bylaws in the wake of the Brandeis settlement and put that definition in so they can say it's all about politics. So a lot of work needs to be done in terms of education and what's been the hollowing out of our educational system. And I sort of have advocated for teaching anti-Semitism in the law at law schools. And I think we were talking about this, and I think obviously institutes play an important part. The problem is it's not going to happen. No faculty are being hired for teaching anti-Semitism law at any law school at any point. They'll be hired for social justice or otherwise. But there is the possibility of bringing in adjuncts. And I think if there's a donor out there who wants to fund a project to put the materials with Rob's book and train adjuncts and otherwise, particularly at the secondary, I don't mean this pejoratively, but the Ohio States of the world that I've taught at before, I think they'd be very open to it if you could present it with an adjunct and do it. And I think having taught that course at both undergraduate and law school, I think there really should be a push in the undergraduate to teach anti-Semitism in the law, because the students are much more curious, much more willing. In the law school, you do get the students, and you actually get some of the far left students who are actually curious, and I've taught that at Berkeley. But I think there needs to be some organized movement if we're going to do this. I don't know if it's you that's going to do it or otherwise. And you also need to remember that Jewish studies, and particularly Israel studies, and I was chair of the board of the Israel Institute. I also advise the DOJ Anti-Semitism Commission, so I sort of see a lot of this. Has been corrupted, right? Dov Waxman at UCLA is writing to imprison Netanyahu. So, the pipeline needs to be redeveloped, and remember, all the grad students are picked by the same people who are doing this. So unless you're putting monitors in place at these universities, at least at the UC system, you're not going to get any change. Which leads me to, so that's actually optimistic, because I think you could do a program to teach this. And I also think that there needs to be a development of, some people should talk to Jesse about the course that he teaches at Harvard Law, which is about just investment of the Mideast. Like, just teach it so we don't have to be burdened by it. Bring in the students and talk about Israel and the Mideast and teaching it. And so I think, there's a lot that can be done there. The Israel Institute's not going to do it for a variety of reasons, but the Academic Engagement Network, others, if there's a donor, I'm happy to talk to them about funders or otherwise to put together a program. I'm sure Rona can take you through it. Second thing is clinics. So one of the worst things about law schools and actually universities is the centers and clinics. Every law school that's an elite law school, the faculty has to have their own center. And so then they just use it to put forth sort of their view of the world. I'm happy to say my law school is one of the biggest offenders. I asked my dean to start an anti-Semitism in the law clinic. He, of course, refused, but he's funded Chessie Boudin to start a criminal justice center. If you look at our legal clinics, their mission is not to teach our students. Their mission is for social justice, equality, however they define these idiotic terms, to suit their own ideological rent-seeking and get paid 3 times what they would be paid in the nonprofit center if they were doing the same thing. But there can and should be. We now have at the Brandeis Center a really robust and great former law partners of real firms and spouses of law professors who are smarter than those law professors. We need to start clinics, whether it's in starting at places like Cardozo, Toro, Ohio State, places where you can do this, so you have the same political valiance and the same forces on faculties that are countervailing. And so this is a long-term project, but that's sort of what I would say. And if there's a donor out there who's willing to work, I used to be on the board of the Academic Engagement Network. I founded it. I was part of the founding class with Mark Udoff. I've been doing this for over 12 years with Jesse. Jesse and I started with Ken back when he was just a few people at the Brandeis Center. We put together the American Studies lawsuit. So we've been doing this a long time, and I'm pretty cynical. But I do think if there's a concerted effort around this, we can stop saying these "oh my God" stories and really sort of bring more people to the table, at least at law schools, and sort of anti-Semitism and legal studies. So thank you for your time.
Nice job.
Excellent.
So I guess the plan was for me to ask questions of the other panelists for a few minutes to kill enough time to leave only 15 minutes and then turn it over to you guys. But why don't we see whether there are any questions in the audience?
Actually, Jesse, I wouldn't mind following up.
Oh,
on comments.
okay.
Okay.
panelist prerogative. You go first.
Thank you. Steve,
Steve?
you did right. However, I think the course will be taught, and I think the model of a adjuncts is probably how it's going to get in the door. And I would point first to someone you may know of, Kenneth Marcus, who's teaching the course at GW using the casebook. And there may be, a few. I think there might be a few people in this room who are thinking about it.
But you need, and I'm not. That's terrific. But I think you could do more. I think at every Columbus, which is my former hometown, where Eric Fingerhut and I used to run a synagogue, is a model where I know there are people trying to do it, but they have adjuncts, but they don't know how to train them and otherwise. I think there needs to be, and it's not a big push, but just some type of conference or something every year where the adjuncts who are interested can be trained by people like you who know what's doing, rather than sort of spot stuff where we have.
Maybe Rona's Center could do that.
So
yeah, Rona.
But also NJAC is doing that this summer. That's the program
great.
that I not mentioned. So they're going to be doing a training for anybody who's interested, and people can, and it's for undergrad, and it's for all different areas of faculty, including law. Andrea is teaching law and anti-Semitism.
And I know
next
a
fall.
funder I can put you in touch with who will fund you. Yes.
Great.
So,
Let's do a deal.
I think it would be great, Steve, as you suggested, if we could get a grant to provide a stipend to adjuncts who are going to teach it.
Or a Cypre award from one of the Brandeis settlements.
And I think here's a check for $5,000. Show up at this training session, and
you don't have to pay the adjuncts. You have to pay the professors who are very cheap, but the adjuncts are like law people who don't need money. They just want to do it.
I wouldn't mind having some to give, but okay.
No, you will pay.
I heard the Qataris are giving.
Yeah.
Maybe now they are, right? They had to change their face.
So are there any questions from the audience, or I'll start peppering the panelists? Yes, back there.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Lindsay Foy, and I practice special ed and employment law in the greater Boston area. But my question is on kind of a different topic. I know we're living in the midst of an increase in engagement in Jewish things by American Jews who weren't necessarily observant or very engaged before October 7th. And this includes teens. And I know something that I hear about, my son's too young for this to be personal, but I hear about the parents of teens, wondering, ooh, how do I get my kids to still show up at shul after the bar mitzvah, after the bat mitzvah? I wonder if anyone here has put any thought into, can some of this history of Jewish civil rights and also the more contemporary, more relevant right now, information about what your rights are now, has anyone put any thought into distilling some of the essential chunks of this into something that would be digestible for curious teenagers?
So there's work being done because of California's ethnic studies requirement. There's work being done by the JCRC and putting together curriculum on this issue. I'd also say, just to be optimistic, like Chabad, it's interesting Mark Rotenberg was here, but students have really been migrating to Chabad because Hillel has had issues with that they have to tolerate the anti-Zionist presence, unfortunately, and it's driven a lot of students. So we get 300 students on a Friday night at Chabad in Berkeley. It's crazy, and we do get more students at Hillel. I'm not trying to badmouth Hillel, but I do think there's work being done at that level in California. So I'd look at that. I don't know if there's anything else you guys know of.
I'm aware of a program called Roots that's going to be launching this year. It's going to be launching actually in the Bay Area and then also in Pittsburgh, which will be an educational program it's going to start with kindergarten, 1st and 9th grade, and basically continue to grow, and kind of a educational scouting program that is going to focus on something else we've talked about, which is not just Jewish history, but Jewish history tied to also Western values. And I think that's going to be a great program. I've proposed a course for middle school students as well. When my own kid's Jewish day school, that would take basically what I'm doing in the law school environment and simplify it for younger kids. I think that inevitably, if we do it well in higher education, I mean, again, it's how long this stuff takes, but if we do it well in higher education, just like critical race theory found its way into elementary school, so will this.
Any other questions from the audience? Yes.
I, for one, would like to know more about the Dear Colleague letter of the Department of Education, what it might contain. And second, a number of topics that relate to anti-Semitism today relate to Israel and to international law. And I was wondering, Rona, about a course in international law focused on those issues. Maybe it's part of your Israel and strategic scholarship program, but I wanted to hear more about that. Thank you.
You want to go first with the Dear Colleague letter?
I think you have to ask Pollock. I mean, I think it's being held up by the White House, was my guess, but I don't know. I mean, I sort of know what it says, but speak to Robert Miller. Or who's domestic policy at the White House?
Steve Miller.
Steve Miller.
Steve Miller.
Yeah. I think
he's in charge of a lot of things domestically and foreign affairs, so a lot of decisions get delayed because he has to bless them, I have been told.
But I would love to know what's in it too.
As far as your courses on international law in Israel, I think that would be amazing. I would definitely be supportive of that. I think we certainly have, in general, a problem with the people who are teaching international law at the law schools. So we're going to have to find a way to, the people who are currently teaching international law in law schools are probably not going to teach it in a way that we would agree with. And if anything, they're just further spreading libel against Israel and Jewish people. In my anti-Semitism and law class, I have a significant Israel component as part of it, and I really do think that that's a critical piece. I think, October 27th came up a couple times today, and also being from Pittsburgh, October 27th was that's when our synagogue in 2018 was shot and 11 members of our community were killed. And as Julie mentioned, the outpouring of love and support that we received when it was American Jews who were being killed for being in a synagogue was so extraordinary and really touching. But it's really something that when we contrast that, certainly with the present moment, but also in the years after 2018 and in the years before, when there were attacks in Israel, those were not perceived as attacks on Jews for being Jews, but on Israelis for being Israelis, as if that's somehow different. And really the conclusion that I draw from that, which is such an absurd conclusion, is that Jews have more of a right to live free from violence in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, than in Jerusalem. Which the absurdity of that in terms of to the extent that, everybody should be safe everywhere. But if we have a right to be safe somewhere, surely it's in Judea and Jerusalem more than in Israel. So I do think the international piece is critical. It's a really important part, both of our research agenda, because we need the scholarship. The scholarship field feeds the teaching. So Thane's book is also now on my reading list for my course.
Sir, back there.
Great discussion, and very helpful. This is Bob Rosenberg. I advise policymakers at the federal government and develop solutions. Separately, I also am in the business world. But I've spent a lot of time learning as much as I can so that about Israel, the Jewish people, and so on. I am certainly Jewish myself and proud of it. The topic of international law, there's a lawyer from Britain who has been interviewed in Israel a number of times She's an excellent international lawyer.
Natasha Hausdorff.
Ostov.
You've got it.
Yeah. She's great.
Yes, I'm glad you know her. Thank you.
You had one there and one there.
Over there, Lior.
Thank you. If you know my name, means that I talk too much.
You're
A
on,
que-
at the post office, you're on the 10 most wanted list.
A question which is semi-related to, I think, first of all, thank you all, and I think these ideas of having this package of knowledge for scholars, as a scholar, not from this field, I really love this idea, and the idea of even lowering it down for my kids and other teens, it's amazing. Something that I would ask, and again, it's relating to a question that I had earlier, we're talking here about law, so scholars in the context of law, but something that I felt that was completely not spoken was more on the political level and on the, like explaining the conflict, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, as Thane said, there is a way to explain war. There are scholars for war for more than pretty much any other subject. There are scholars for politics. And in all of this situation, just like we narrow down everything to one word, genocide, we narrow down all of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict to one or two words, one state, two state, and we neglect the fact that this is, I would say, more complicated than any mathematical problem I can think of, and probably unsolvable. But I would want people, especially in universities that are supposed to be people that are able to think and to hold complex ideas, to be able to just have a sense of how complex it is. Not to be experts, but to have a sense of how complex this is before you come and suggest your brilliant idea, because you narrow it down to a word. And I think that in the context of explaining all of the Jewish litigation and law, I think this should be a complementary piece that kind of, and it's more hard than I can think, but I would be happy to hear your thoughts about how can someone package this piece in a way that can help a student or anyone that want to think and want to understand beyond just the law, understand how complicated it is to some extent.
Let me tell you about Mideast legal studies at Berkeley. So 4 of our 6 Jewish studies lines are in Mideast legal studies. All of them have been open for 7 years now, because the litmus test for hiring them is that you have to be an anti-Zionist, which actually isn't that hard to find in Jewish studies, sadly. But a number of us have been able to block the hiring, but we can't hire. I know Berkeley's ground zero of the idiocracy, but this is a problem at Columbia. If you notice, their recommendation was actually put those studies outside. A lot of the hiring over the last few years has been DEI hiring, as you know. That is not for complex thinking, that is for ideological thinking. And so, we can talk about what a complex course would look like, but the problem is the pipeline, which has not changed very much that I see, is just not there. And if you're a rational person beginning graduate studies, and you were conservative or someone who was Jewish or Israeli, where would you go, right? You'd go to economics or computer or science. You wouldn't go to Mideast studies or rhetoric, which we actually have a rhetoric department at Berkeley. I don't know what they do, but there's one there.
There's another problem,
Yeah.
which, first of all, these departments are basically captured by people with a particular point of view, and
Yeah.
it's not just Middle East studies, a lot of the humanities departments, the soft social science departments, they're basically captured. But the other problem is that there are very few students who come to Harvard and want to learn about the Middle East in a sustained way by becoming a Middle East studies major, or even take a course. Why do you need to take a course when you just go to TikTok and just see what people you admire say? So you could probably quote unquote fix these departments. I mean, I think it would be extremely difficult, but hypothetically, if you could fix them and get more ideological balance, I don't think it would make much difference, because most of the students who show up at a place like Harvard are not going to be taking these courses anyways, and the ones that are activists, political activists, what they're engaging in is something that's best explained by psychology and sort of not by logic and facts. And so you could, so I don't think that would really address the problem.
I mean,
even if you could get ideological balance in these departments.
I mean, Bernard, what's his name, out of Princeton, has been trying to do this.
Bernard Haeckel.
Yeah, and he wrote What Went Wrong, which is one of the best books about the Mideast ever written. But it's a very small group of people in that area. Ron Hassner at UC Berkeley, very charismatic guy, teaches but it's hard to find those people. You get more Dov Waxmans than Ron Hassners.
I've been told by people who are conservatives in Middle East studies departments that their students cannot get hired.
Yeah.
Even if the student is doing something that may be sort of politically neutral, they can't get hired by a Middle East studies department at a university, and so they go into consulting or they go work for the federal government or whatever. So this is it's a systemic problem. It pervades a lot of different departments, but it's not really the cause of what we see on campus. The students, I looked at the students who were most engaged in anti-Israel activism at Harvard. I looked at their biographies, and a lot of them just had showed up at Harvard as freshmen. This was October of their freshman year. I mean, they probably hadn't finished picking their courses yet. And you have, so it's not like they're coming in contact with the Middle East Studies department, getting indoctrinated and then going off. They come in because they've been taught to think a certain way in high school, in middle school, through social media, through their friend networks at other colleges, and then they come to graduate school at Harvard, and that's how their views are being shaped. It's not by the small Middle East Studies faculty at Harvard. Yeah.
I would also just add, can I just add real quick that the Israeli-Palestinian or really Arab-Israeli conflict is as complicated as any other conflict. It's not more complicated than any other conflict. The X factor, I don't think so. I mean, I think there are plenty of complicated things in the world. I think the problem that we're facing is anti-Zionism. And anti-Zionism is not complicated. It's actually very simple. And once we recognize and expose anti-Zionism as a form of Jew hatred or anti-Semitism, however you want to phrase it, I think that's very clarifying. As far as my approach to my students, I don't teach Middle Eastern studies, and I really don't teach any of this in any of my normal courses, but I do have a gender in the law course. And in my gender in the law course, I've always had a unit on rape as a tool of war. And so post October 7th, that is now part of my class. And so I teach that just like I teach other horrific instances as rape as a tool of war. And the reality is my students really, they thank me for kind of giving them this, wow, you just gave us information without telling us what to think, whatever it is that they're so used to. And I just appreciate them for just slightly being open and for pausing. I asked them, they said, this is what they said this year. Thank you for not giving us a call to action after you taught us about this. And I said, you know what? I do have a call to action. And my call to action is pause. Know what you know and know what you don't know. And God knows there's enough sexual assault in your own neighborhood that if this is an issue you care about, go solve it in your neighborhood. But when you're being asked to believe something or know something about something you know nothing about, just pause and that's it. Just pause.
Thank you. Alex Safian, Foundation for Truth About Israel. I actually spent a lot of time in the encampment at Harvard since I graduated from Harvard and taught there a little bit and lived near the campus. I was there every 2 or 3 days in the encampment. And despite the students saying, you know, we don't engage with Zionists, all you have to do is ask a Harvard student a couple of questions and they start answering. They can't help themselves. So I did ask them a lot of questions and had a marathon 3-hour debate with them. And what I eventually found out, not then, but when I met Israeli students and others who were in the encampment, they had actually put together a nice intelligence dossier on what was going on. And it was very hard to spot on your own. But there was a leader behind the scenes who was a graduate student at the Divinity School. And I don't recall his name now, but I think from his name he might have been Persian rather than Arab, but he was Muslim, and he was an activist at whatever, UC San Diego or wherever he went in San Diego. And he was the guy who was calling the shots, who was like a mafia leader. He was hardly saying anything. He would just kind of like whisper to somebody and then things would happen. And he was totally in charge of what they would say, what they would do, which journalists they would interact with, et cetera. So those freshmen that you spoke of were really intersectional. They were just following orders, and they were indoctrinated in intersectionality. And all it takes is, you know, maybe 10% of the students or 5% of the students, and that's enough to make a movement essentially on campus. And the rest of the students either don't care or they don't get involved or they follow along. But it wasn't really freshmen or sophomores who were leading the way. It was very much intersectional and very much based on this graduate student. And for some reason, a lot of the problematic students came from the Divinity School, but this guy in particular was the recognized leader. So it really took people putting together a dossier to figure out what was going on, because certainly I didn't see it the first couple of times I was there. I didn't recognize it at all, but eventually if you're told, then you start seeing it.
My sense was that graduate students were very involved in sort of organizing the protest at Harvard. But this person that you're talking about, he didn't get indoctrinated at Harvard. Like, he came pre-indoctrinated to Harvard, and that was my point. That whether they were graduate students or undergrads, they're basically coming to campus, at least at Harvard, sort of primed with this ideology.
Last question.
But, yeah.
Hi, Ari Naaman, Harvard School of Public Health. Jesse, I was really interested in your comment that the problem is further upstream than the university, that by the time people come to the university, the problem already exists. And I guess my short question to you is, what can we do about that? And I think about this through the prism of being, I think, on the younger end of the age distribution for this room and a lot of similar rooms, and really worrying as a student of the history of Zionism. I know that so many of the really important energy and activism in Zionist history has come from young people, young, idealistic, passionate people. And I guess my question here is, what can we do to reinvigorate our movement and to re-inject that energy so that we create a pathway for young people to participate in what I think has previously been referred to as the civil rights movement of the Jewish people?
I have a comment on that when we're done.
That question is above my pay grade, but it's below Stephen, so he's going to answer.
I do have a thought on this. It's admissions. I mean, I just had a student who asked me for a recommendation for a judicial clerk. And he was like, well, I'm sorry that I'm a member of XYZ crazy progressive group on my resume, but the career services at the law school told me it would be advantageous to be a member of Outlaws for getting a job. So I'm a member of it, right? And even though they have a bylaw objecting Zionists. And I said, I don't care. 40% of Berkeley law students identify as LGBT. I don't think that's true. I think that students have been selected and were selected prior to October 7th for their social justice characteristics and other characteristics that prime them for what Jesse was doing. And so I think there's more to that. The elite high schools, if you go to ethical and those things, were problematic. But you have to, when you're selecting students for being batshit crazy progressives, you're going to get batshit crazy progressives. Shock. And so that's really what's going on. And this has been raised repeatedly at Berkeley Law. I mean, again, UC is sort of an outlier. But at other schools, and the decline of the use of the LSAT's been watered down, the SAT, et cetera, all that's contributed to sort of not getting the top students and the watering down of standards. The Yale report, which everyone should read, which came out on Wednesday, which was yesterday, talks about this. So I'm more heartfelt at sort of real schools as opposed to some other schools like mine, but we'll see what happens.
Was your question about cultivating a generation of Jewish Zionists, or specifically about admissions?
I would say cultivating a generation of young Jewish Zionists.
So I want to plug Alexander Muss High School in Israel. So I'm answering this as the mom of 3 proud Zionist kids. And I mean, obviously, there's so much available. There's plenty of programming available, but parents have to opt into it and have to spend money for it and have to choose that for their children, starting at a pretty young age. But if I look at the one thing that I did that I think was the most impactful for my kids, it's that each of them studied in Israel on Alexander Muss High School in Israel, which is a JNF program, as study abroad during high school. And I had taken them to Israel many times before that. But there's something about going to Israel as a teenager with a whole bunch of teenagers from the US and traveling through Israel and learning 4,000 years of Jewish history on the road that I don't think anything is better than that program.
All right, I think that's going to bring our panel to an end. Thank panelists.